sandwiches, ice cream, coffee and snacks, and many other pleasing treats. Our foods are fresh and tasty, our drinks satisfying and refreshing. They're so good.
Welcome to Average Joe's Drive-In.
And now, on with the show.
Hey everybody, welcome to Average Joe's Drive-In. I am your host, TJ Washburn, and with me this week is author and musician Steve Van Samson. How you doing?
Pretty good. How's it going, man?
Oh, not too bad. Enjoying the lovely weather here in Maine and just relaxing, trying to relax a little bit after work.
Nice. Chilling out, maxing, relaxing, all cool.
Oh, yeah. You know, doing the Fresh Prince thing.
Sounds good.
So tell me a little bit, tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and, what you do.
Sure. I am a new indie author. I have published a couple books, both of which belong to the same series. I have a series called Predator World, which is actually, it can be encapsulated in 3 quick words, which I like to call Vampires in Africa. They're vampire post-apocalyptic books. They take place in Africa. They're for adults. It's horror, and I made vampires scary again. At least I tried to. And they definitely don't sparkle, just in case you're wondering.
No, they don't. No sparkling in the sunlight, or
definitely not. Definitely no sparkling here. These guys are just monstrous and mindless eating machines, kind of thing. And yeah, so I have my first book is The Bone Eater King, and the sequel is Marrow Dust, and that's what I've done so far. And I write books in my spare time. I'm working on a couple works in progress right now with that. And then I also am the singer of the heavy metal band Enchanted Exile, and we actually just put out our second album on June 8th, which is called Bloodwork Scriptorium, and that is available everywhere fine music can be downloaded.
Very good. So what got you, what are some of the authors and people that really got you into, writing and kind of sparked that interest? Was it something from like a, one of those things like an early age you knew you wanted to do, or kind of a later in life type thing? Or
it's weird, when I was a kid, I used to always make up stories for, like, when you're kids and you're playing whatever game, you're being G.I. Joes, or you're being Ninja Turtles, or you're being whoever. And me and my friends used to always do that. We didn't play as too many sports. We would just do that. We would just pretend and come up with stuff and just play, all the time. And this is, when I'm, under the age of 10, certainly, but I don't know, 7, 8 years old.
This was last week.
Okay, it was last week. Yeah, that's true. You're right. I had a relapse last week, but no. And I just remembering back, it's like I always was the one coming up with the stories that we would do, and they were stupid, but sort of looking back, like not the simplest of things. Like I remember having like lots of characters and situations, and even if they were characters that there wasn't a human analog for, like all of us, we had our characters, but then there were side characters and stuff, people to send us on missions and bad guys and all this stuff. And I don't know. So I feel like at the time I just didn't realize it, but looking back, I feel like I've always like world built, I've always sort of had stories kind of brewing in my brain that have kind of been just under the surface. And it wasn't until after I graduated college that it even occurred to me at all that maybe I should try writing a book. It just didn't, I couldn't put the two together. Like, yeah, I have these stories, things in my brain. I don't know what that means.
I can absolutely relate to the whole, I'd play with my Star Wars, G.I. Joe, He-Man, Transformers as a kid and do the same thing. You're setting up these big elaborate scenarios, which 90% of the time were things I had seen in movies or TV shows or whatever, But then as a kid, you do just the craziest stuff that relates nothing to do with what you're, the toys you're actually playing with.
Right.
And make these big grand crossovers, where He-Man are fighting the Transformers and or Star Wars versus Transformers versus He-Man versus whatever.
Yeah.
You do all those things, and it kind of gets those creative wheels turning. I know when I was a kid, I used to I'd make like story flip book type things where I had a little. This is dating my age a little bit here, but I had a little cassette recorder, like one of those Fisher-Price type cassette recorders, and I would record on that, and I would like read my story out, and I would be like, at the beep, turn the page type thing, because those books were really popular when I was a kid. So I would make up my own stories and kind of do that, and I drew all the time as a kid, and that was kind of what got me into it. But as I've said on the show many times for the regular listeners, I didn't write for years. It wasn't until I kind of retired from music that I started writing. So, I mean, I was in my early 30s before I ever wrote my first book.
Right. Yeah, same kind of thing. It's interesting. But yeah, like you're talking about the cross-pollination of, different properties. Oh man, that was my favorite thing. Do you remember a toy called Battle Beasts?
Oh, absolutely. You rub the chest and the little you get the earth, fire, wind thing on it. Oh yeah. Oh, I love those.
Yeah, dude, I still have all of mine.
Oh, nice.
I still have all of my Battle Beasts, and I think I'm only missing for the grand catalog. I think I'm only missing 4 or 5.
Wow. I see those come along right about the time I was kind of getting out of the toy thing. So I do remember them, but I never was super heavy into them. But I always thought it was a really cool concept.
What I liked about them was they were not attached to any property, right? Like there wasn't a Battle Beast show or movie or anything. So you sort of had to use your imagination if you were playing with them. And I always liked animal guys. I was way into the Ninja Turtles and stuff, and I loved the Battle Beasts. I thought they were so badass. And what was great about them is this is a fun fact, they actually fit in every G.I. Joe vehicle ever made. I
did not know that. I don't remember ever trying that as a kid. Yeah. I had a lot of G.I. Joe stuff.
It's perfect. So. It all comes down to their waist and the fact that they all had that little dot, that little hole on the bottom of their foot that a lot of figures had back then.
Yeah.
And a lot of play sets would actually have those little nubbin dot things or whatever.
Oh, all my Star Wars play sets had those. So you could stand your Star Wars figures up.
Right, exactly. Well, so that was like a standard size or whatever. So, you could actually do that with the Battle Beast. So they fit in everything. And so I used to buy G.I. Joe vehicles and play with my friends. I had this two friends of mine were way into it with me. And we used to buy G.I. Joe vehicles and play the Battle Beasts in the vehicles, and we had all our own characters, all our own stories, and I even remember at one point we had the Batman the movie, the first one from 1989, the Batwing.
Oh yeah.
It's still my favorite Batwing, the one that just looks like the symbol perfectly, where it went up and then silhouetted against the moon. That's still my favorite shot in any Batman movie, and yeah, I had that, and they fit in that perfectly, too. It's freaking awesome.
That was a good thing about that time period. I mean, outside of a few things, those toys were so interchangeable with a lot of stuff, like you were saying, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. But that is, now, you think from a psychological viewpoint, if that fueled part of was that something, looking back, you think that fueled your decision to write a vampire novel based in Africa?
Probably not. I would say it fostered some creativity at an early age, though, for sure, and the idea of world building, definitely. But the vampires in Africa thing, and this is what I freely tell everyone in the book, in The Bone Eater King. I mentioned this in the foreword. I'm a really big fan of Robert E. Howard, who's the writer of Conan the Barbarian.
Right.
And Solomon Kane, and he actually wrote quite a number of horror stories. And one of my favorite anthology books of all time is a book called The Horror Stories of Robert E. Howard, and it's just a really great collection. It has just absolutely freaking staggeringly gorgeous pen and ink drawings by Greg Staples, who, I don't know if you're familiar, but he was he's done a lot for Judge Dredd, I guess. He's an English artist, and he is just incredible, this guy. And he has, one or two pen and ink drawings per story. And it's just an awesome collection. But there is a story called The Hills of the Dead. And it is a Solomon Kane story. And Solomon Kane is actually my favorite of his ongoing hero characters, more so than Conan. Are you familiar with the character at all?
No, not really. I mean, I'm familiar with Conan, but Solomon Kane, I've never really delved into that at all.
Yeah, he did have a movie with James Purefoy. They made probably about, I don't know, early 2000s or something. I'm not sure when.
I think I have that on my Netflix queue or my Amazon Prime queue or something, but I haven't watched it yet.
I mean, Purefoy is awesome always, but the movie is decent. It's not bad, but you also have to sort of accept that it's sort of cheesy fun, and it's definitely the one thing it does well, I think, is it's true to the spirit of the character because it doesn't adapt any specific story. And that's really important for me. As a little bit of a tangent, I have a massive pet peeve with adaptions that are handled incorrectly, or adaptions that are handled with what I feel where the heart is in the wrong place. They don't actually give a crap about the source material. They're just trying to make a quick buck or whatever. But I felt like I feel like it's worth checking out, sometime. Yeah. But anyway, the character is essentially this roving, he's like a Puritan, evil demon hunter guy. He's not evil. He hunts evil. There are stories where he's tracking down ghosts. There are stories where he's just walking along and something sort of supernatural kind of happens to him. But there is a story, The Hills of the Dead, where he actually travels to Africa and does have this little self-contained adventure dealing with vampire-like things. And the story does actually call them vampires, but they're very unique. They're super unique. They describe the skin as being like wood, that they're almost wooden to the touch because they're so dried out, and that the skin, you could literally press your thumb right through them because they're so dried out. They're like these walking husks. So I don't think it's as much that they're super strong or anything like that. It's just that there's a lot of them, but they retreat to this one city, this abandoned city, and all the local tribes just know to steer clear of it. But one of the things that I loved so much was he had this idea, and I didn't take any of these exact concepts. These were just things that sort of fueled the idea.
Oh, exactly. I think every writer wears their influences on their sleeves. I mean, it's one of those things. It's hard not to. The key is, I think, as a writer, and the more you develop and the more you write and the more you put out, is you find your own voice where you're taking those influences and kind of morphing them into your own thing and not necessarily just copying. I think every author, especially in the beginning, I know I did to an extent, the authors that really influenced me, I think people that, have read any of my early books especially, probably could say, well, geez, that's a little bit like, King or Hatala or any of those, because those are my influence, a couple of my really big influences.
Right. I think what sort of I try to do is instead of trying to steal the idea, saying he did this, I'm going to steal this, I'm going to give my vampires wooden skin or something. I think the idea is more like, well, why do I like this so much? What is it about this that makes it so appealing to me personally? And I think if you can identify that, you can sort of more easily come up with your own thing that sort of gives you the same feeling. And I definitely feel like, well, I like the juxtaposition of familiarity, saying, well, I understand what a vampire is, and then saying, well, I'm going to give you a little bit of the familiar, which he did. There were bloodsuckers, and they come out at night, and then a whole bunch of new stuff. And it's like, all right, well, so it's not, I don't need to steal something like wood and skin. I can just come up with my own new stuff.
Right.
And stuff like that. So I think that is really super important. And that's how I go about it. If there's something I love, I try to figure out why I love it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And, when you do, you figure out you do that, like, you're doing that inner monologue to yourself about, okay, well, why do I think this is really cool? Because it's a little different than the standard trope of, X, Y, and Z. Right. So then that gets the wheels turning, and you start thinking about, well, what if I did this and this, because this would be kind of cool and this would be different, because it gets you thinking outside the box.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
And,
Exactamundo.
And that gets you, when you start thinking outside the box, that's when the creative process, for me at least, I know, always really kicks into high gear.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it's just, from there you just got to see where the story takes you.
And I always like those different takes on traditional
tropes.
Tropes and characters, genres, that stuff where I'm a huge, like, George Romero fan.
Okay.
So a lot of people didn't like 28 Days Later, or even though technically they weren't zombies, they were infected. But that idea of, to me, Danny Boyle was taking that and turning that into, he was a modern twist on the standard zombie trope. And now that twist that he did, is almost a standard now. You don't see a lot of slow zombies and stuff anymore,
True.
So it's weird how, this circle of these things where somebody has taken an influence and it's worked and gone into something new, and then eventually it almost comes back around to the original idea.
Yeah, true. It is funny how evolution works. It's end up back at the beginning. We'll all be fish again.
Exactly. We'll be a single cell, microorganism,
yeah.
And working our way through. So, other than Howard, who are some other authors that you really admire and have influenced you?
I mean, for sure, Stephen King. I mean, it's hard to write horror and not say that. And I'm a really big fan of Joe Hill as well.
Oh, I love Joe. I love Joe's work. I haven't read The Fireman or his new collection yet, but I definitely am planning on getting around to it. I have both of them. I just haven't had a chance to read them yet. So.
Well, The Fireman's pretty long, so.
Yeah.
Actually, he said that I saw him at a few months ago at some appearance, and he was like, maybe it was more than a few months ago. It was last year, I think, the end of last year. And he said, the reason that he wrote Strange Weather, which is 4 novellas, just unrelated novellas in one book, is because, like, The Fireman was so long, and the book before that was Nosferatu, and that was so long. He's like, Jesus, I wrote these gargantuan books. Each one took me, like, 2.5 years of my life to write or something. And I just wanted to write something short. It's like, I don't want to only now say, well, every time I have to write a little bit more, because he's said that, and I agree with this so wholeheartedly, that, the amount of pages a book has is not directly proportionate to how good it is. I think that people for a while there, especially like in the 80s and 90s, like these mammoth, I mean, King still does it,
Oh, King and, a couple of my favorites, King and Clive Barker, both put out just some monstrous monstrous books. And, I always liked a lot of, like, Whitley Strieber's stuff and Rick Atala's stuff because it was shorter and I could buzz right through. Even Dean Koontz to an extent. I'm very hit or miss with Dean Koontz. I've never been, like, a huge fan, but the books that he gets right, I really enjoy. But I find the ones that I really enjoy are the really short ones with him anyway. Yeah. The ones where he's not just trying to, stuff an extra 100 pages in so he can have 400 pages, or 500 pages.
More often than not, you can tell. You can so tell when it's padding. It's like, I'm not fooled here. this doesn't need to be here at all. This does not make it better. You should have just left this 100 pages out.
Oh, exactly.
It would have been a stronger 300-page book than it is a 400-page book.
And I think, as writers, I would rather. My whole concept is most of the time when I'm writing, I never write with a specific word count, or unless I'm writing a short story for like an anthology or something where I know I have to try to come in under a certain, word count. But if I'm just writing a story that I want to write, I write it until I feel that it's done. I don't worry about it if that takes me 60 pages, wonderful. If that takes me 700 pages, awesome. But I want the story to be told, how it should be told and not have to worry about a word count.
Right. And honestly, the fact that, this whole indie publishing thing exists nowadays, it lets us do that,
Oh, absolutely.
Whether or not we find success with said piece of art, at least we were able to realize it the way we intended it to be. So.
Oh, absolutely. And that's,
right.
And that's one of the key things, like I don't even usually, submit my manuscripts, my novels or my novellas, because I don't want to get into the whole process of deadlines and having to have stuff out by a certain date, and it has to be, they want X amount of words, and I don't even want to deal with that. If somebody likes something I wrote and wants to come to me and say, hey, would like to release your novel, awesome. But I'm not interested. I really am. I'm really not interested unless somebody is going to give me a good reason and financial gain from said reason. It's not really anything that I know I'm personally interested in doing, because I'm one of these people. I have so many creative projects going all the time that sometimes it takes me a long time to finish stuff. And like lately, since I released my first nonfiction book last year, Confessions of a Boring White Guy, out there for anybody who's listening, you can find that on Amazon.com/author/Thomas Washburn Jr. I have just been focusing on writing short stories, basically. And I've got about 8 or 9 of them done, but I haven't done my final edits on most of them yet. And some of them need some serious tweaks and rewrites, and but I'm slowly getting there with that stuff. So and I'm hoping I'll have everything finished up by fall and I can put out a new short story collection. But
nice.
I'm not gonna release a date until I have everything basically done.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that's great. I mean, you're where you want to be, and that's awesome. I think it's very difficult, the concept for me, and I know other authors are able to do it, but the concept to me of being a part-time author, of having a day job, and having an agent with everything you said. You have deadlines, you have, this book is due at the end of the month, and you got this other thing on the horizon that hinges on the current book and all this stuff, and everything is like, to me, the thought of doing that not full time is almost unfathomable.
Yeah.
And I know people do it, but there are people that have vastly different word put out than I do. These people who can write 2,000 to 5,000 words every single day without fail. Not me. So
no.
I try to do as much as I possibly can, and I do have family and kids and stuff. But I do what I can, and as long as stuff moves forward, that's my thing.
Yeah, and that whole thing of not having deadlines and not having specific word counts that you need to hit, I think can be a double-edged sword for independent authors. Because sometimes I think you don't have that. I think the deadline can create a sense
a
fire and a sense of motivation. Exactly.
Yeah.
Because then you're like, well, shit,
Yeah,
I've got to get this done. So you crack down and you say, well, instead of maybe watching that movie tonight, I'm going to sit down and write for 2 hours, or whatever. Whereas an independent author, especially if you don't have a set deadline, a self-imposed deadline, then it's often easier just to, I'll get to it when I get to it.
It sure is.
Which that has been my problem. Personally, that's been my biggest issue lately with finishing stuff is, I have the podcast. I started working on some new music myself. I've been, getting ready to do the stuff for the film adaptation of my short story Chum. I've
Very
also,
cool.
And I have just my normal regular life stuff. And this time of year for me is my job is super busy in the summer. So it's really extra hard for me to find that time to actually sit down and spend a couple hours writing,
Right. I mean, for me, like a perfect writing situation day is like if I can get like 500 to 600 or so words written at lunch, and then another 500 to 600 words written at the end of the day. If I can break 1,000, I usually feel pretty good about my day.
Yeah.
So that's kind of just me, but that's like less than half or less than a third of some people. But hey, we're all different, right?
I know there's authors out there that I have personally talked to that can do 10,000 words in a day, which is just mind blowing to me. That would take me if I was able to write every day for at least an hour or two every day. Maybe I could get that in a week if I was having a real good week.
A real good week, yeah.
If I was having a really good week, but I know there's authors out there that do that.
Absolutely.
That hit that 8,000-10,000. That's their average day.
Right.
That's just mind blowing to me. So.
It is. But as long as we're creating and making progress, I feel good about it. I generally do tend to feel bad about it if too many days go by and I feel like I haven't done enough, and because you do sort of get that way. I think as a creative person, you're like, God, I'm wasting my time. I used to play so many video games, like all the time. I grew up. That was like one of my main hobbies is playing video games. I almost never get to go through a game.
Yeah. Games go, I'm still a pretty avid gamer, but I don't game anywhere near as much as I used to. Again, because I have so many different creative endeavors going on in real life stuff. And, the games that I play now generally tend to be games that I can play for half an hour or an hour, save, and then just pick back up the next time I get a chance. And there's times I go a week or two and don't play anything.
Yeah, right.
And that's just how it goes. I think that's part of the reason I have remained so enamored with the Fallout 4, with Fallout 4 in particular. I keep going back to that one because I can play for an hour, half hour, whatever. Nice, I can make a settlement, or I can complete a side quest or do whatever. And those are the types of games that I tend to lean towards now when I do game. But I know personally right now, I have ideas for like 3 screenplays that I want to start working on. And so I always have too many irons in the fire for the amount of time I have to do stuff. And what usually ends up happening with me, and I'm sure you probably run into the same thing, is or maybe not, maybe you manage your time better than I do, but I have a tendency of burning myself out on certain things sometimes because I'm one of these people that I always jump in feet first when I start a new project, and I just go for it and try to do it and get it done. And I sometimes tendency to go a little overboard. and then I kind of wear myself out a little bit on it, and then I need a break, and then it takes me a while to get back into the flow of things. And I kind of did that with writing, honestly, when I first started. I released between short story collections, novels, and the nonfiction stuff, I released, 6 books worth of material in like a 4-year span. So, and on top of several shorts and other stuff that I worked on, and just, I just nonstop, like I was like every few months I was releasing something, and it's how it felt for me anyway. And it's been weird because I haven't released anything since last fall. For me, that's a really long period of time of not having any new, anything new out there.
Right. Huh. Yeah, that's pretty busy, man.
But
That's a pretty strict schedule.
But I also, when I was hitting that schedule, I made myself sit down and write for at least an hour to 2 hours every night, regardless of how I felt, regardless of my creative output that day. If I was having, even if I was having writer's block, I would at least sit there for an hour or two and try to work my way through it and get something out. And that's how I managed that. But when I was doing that, it made it next to impossible for me to do anything other than that, because that was my free time every day.
Right. Well, you know what Henry Rollins says about free time.
Free time is wasted time.
Now, there's no such thing as free time. It's just time.
Yeah, I'm a big Rollins fan. So yeah, he is such an interesting dude, because he kind of he is what like I aspire to be, kind of, as far as when he wants to travel, he travels. When he wants to write a book, writes a book. When he wants to act, he does that. When he he doesn't really do the music thing so much anymore, but it's just that sort of thing is just that's like, man, I really dig that. So
That's true. That's the sort of thing that wealth allows, I think.
Yeah.
Success. And did you see that movie he did, the He Never Died?
Oh, I love that movie. What a weird film, but that was so cool.
I really liked it.
Yeah. I was
really, really surprised at how much I legitimately really liked it. It was great.
It was one of those films that I really wasn't sure, like, am I going to like this? But it's got Rollins in it, and I generally like him. So I was like, he's always weird, because he is a weirdo, and in that movie, it was so written for him. Like, it was perfect. But it's that, it seemed like it was written for that, like, toned down side of his personality, when he's not amped up on 10 and just going off on his spiels, and when
the cords aren't popping out of his neck at all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when he's not like freaking right out, and he's got that calm, collected, just intellect going on. That was that character, and it was such a good movie. But it's a weird movie, because it has some action in it, but it's almost like a drama. Really, more than anything, it's really a drama with a little bit of action mixed in, but the story itself is just so odd.
Yeah. Well, you know what that movie does that I love in general with any story, and this is something that I definitely aspire to always do with my writing, is it does force the reader to meet it halfway, because they never come out and say, this guy's the devil. He got his wings cut off, right? This is what I think happened, but this is not anything the movie comes right out and says. You don't really know for sure who he is or what he is or anything like that.
Right.
But
you get those
pretty
hints.
sure
Yeah.
He was the devil and he somehow lost his wings, and he's just living his life out on Earth because he doesn't give a shit anymore.
Yeah, and it's weird because they kind of drop some hints, but like you said, they never come out and actually say it. So it gives you a chance as somebody watching the film to kind of fill in the blanks or try to fill in the blanks.
You have to use your brain. I mean, I think that the most, of all words at this point in our history, like one of the most broken ones is the word plot hole. Everybody is so quick to cry plot hole and stuff. It's unbelievable. I mean, everybody on the internet is so opinionated and so ready to spew vitriol at everything. It's almost as if the vitriol is at the ready, and it takes like 10 times the amount of effort to spin them around the other way to get them to actually like something, instead of just starting at a null set. Like, just, how about it could go either way? How about you just start in the middle? And, that's it. But no, it's like, it seems like people just are so ready to hate stuff.
Well,
and the plot hole thing, like, so often people have said, oh, bang, plot hole, bang, plot hole. And I'm like, you know what, dude, that's not what a plot hole is. They didn't answer that. They didn't resolve that plot line. You can call it a hanging plot line, but it's not a plot hole. It's not something that logically breaks the narrative in any way. And that's a really good example in that movie, He Never Died, of, I could see somebody saying like, oh, well, it's a huge plot hole. They don't say what he is. They don't even explain what the things on his back were. like, dude, freaking pay attention and meet the movie halfway. Like, use your brain.
But that is, it's a good point, but it brings up a really good point about the fact that, unfortunately, as a society in general, we are so used to these days, especially being spoon-fed the answers to everything at a moment's notice, that stuff like that, whether it be writing, films, even music to an extent, if you don't blatantly lay everything right out for people, they are quick to jump on it, quick to tear it apart, or just, whatever. People have, it seems to me in a lot of cases, people have lost the ability to use their imagination because of of easy access and everything being spoon-fed to them.
Yeah, it's an attention span thing too, I think.
And as somebody within a short attention span, I mean, I understand that, but I also think it's just basically people have become lazy when it comes to their entertainment.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you listen to 10 seconds of a song and you're saying how much the album sucks. You watched a movie for 20 minutes and you're saying the movie sucked. It's like there are so many stories and movies and whatever it is that pay off at the end. Not everything is instant gratification.
Right.
And if you have only instant gratification, the result is Michael Bay movies, right? It's just like, okay, well, there's actually no soul to this at all. There's no character development. Everybody's paper thin, but hey, there's constant action going on. People always say explosions. It's not just explosions. That first Ninja Turtle movie is so noisy. That's all I can say about it. It's like
it's a sensory overload. It's sensory overload.
Noisy at all times. So, like 4 people are talking, and then they're leaping here and going there, and they're flipping over a truck, and there's no downtime. There's no quiet downtime. And I keep bringing up the Ninja Turtles, but as a big fan of the Ninja Turtles, one of the things that I loved about the property was the relationships. And they are brothers. And yes, okay, you can boil each one of the turtles down into their one chief component part that makes their personality trait. Okay, Leo's the leader, Raph's mad, Donnie's smart, Mikey's the funny one. Sure, but that is literally all they were in those Michael Bay Ninja Turtle movies. There were no moments of quiet, just reflection. In the first original movie from the 80s.
I was just going to bring those up.
It's like there were so many moments like that. When Leonardo is sitting over Raphael, and Raphael's unconscious in the bathtub, and they had just had this huge fight, and Raph almost got, do I have it backwards? Yeah, it was Leo in the tub. Yeah. Raph was sitting over him. And, he had almost, threatened him or something the last time they saw each other. And then Leo got jumped, and now, Raph loves the guy. He's his brother. They had a fight, and I'm very close with my brother, and I really get, I love sibling characters. When there's that complex, I kind of want to punch you in the face half the time, but I love you like no one else.
Yeah.
Sort of those two things both exist at the same time.
Well, and that's the thing with those movies, because I just was going to bring those up before you mentioned that when you were talking about that. I really like the 3 original Turtle movies. The first one is easily the best of the 3. The second one is pretty good, and the third one is okay. But even if they were a little cheesy and puppety looking, and effects wise, those films to me stand out way better than the modern day Michael Bay ones.
Oh yeah.
Those are more to me. That's more true to the characters, and in the dynamics. They, like you said, they're not one dimensional. It gives them, those little nuances give them more of a personality and flesh them out and make you care about them. Even Casey Jones, even the thing with Casey and, being claustrophobic in the car and, the little jokes back and forth with them. And that makes Casey, he's an angry hard ass, but he's also human,
Yeah. It's those little character moments, those little idiosyncrasies that do make a big difference to me.
And those,
And
you know, as a writer, that's something that I try to put into my characters as well. You know, little things that maybe you notice, maybe you don't, but I try to put some of those things into those characters so people can relate to them beyond, like, you know, a surface level.
Right, exactly.
Whether whether you always succeed at that or not is another story. But you know,
up to debate.
But it's up to debate, exactly. But I know it's something I try to do. But it's finding the balance of, you know, there's also that fine line balance of finding, you know, overdoing it in being kind of lazy and underdo it, you know, just. And you get to the whole, you know, going back to the plot hole thing. There's also lazy writing and lazy storytelling where, well, we're not going to bother to fill the blank in here. Just, you know, we'll let the audience figure it out because we can't think of anything, you know.
Right. It's not that plot holes don't exist. They are a thing. It's just that people essentially group all these other things under this blanket of, oh, I'm annoyed, it's a plot hole. I don't instantly have the gratification. It must be a plot hole. It's like, no, that's technically not what a plot hole is, dude.
Yeah. Oh, no. You know, a plot hole is something that is completely, you know, to me anyway, is something that is completely just out of place, or it's something that even, you know, a basic train of thought can't fill the hole, and you know, type deal, where it's like, you know, this makes no sense whatsoever.
Okay, so here's an example. Here's, I think, one that comes up a lot. Two schools of thought. Is Rogue One aside, okay, is the fact that the Death Star was constructed with this one major weakness of that exhaust port, is that, you know, discounting the fact that Rogue One explained it away, is that a plot hole to you?
To me,
a lot of people will say, "Oh, that's such a plot hole."
No, to me, it's not, because I mean, any construction, it doesn't matter what it is, has got flaws in it.
Right.
I mean, we until we get to a utopian perfect, you know, world where everything is perfect, there's always going to be flaws. There's always going to be little things that, especially in anything that's creative. Anything that's creative, I don't care what it is. I mean, there's films that I consider perfect, you know, like Jaws, for example, my favorite movie of all time. I consider that a perfect movie.
Favorite movie of all time. Okay, cool.
But there are plot holes in that film, and there are. All right,
give me a plot hole for Jaws.
With Jaws, you're putting me on the you're putting me on the spot.
Damn right.
You know,
Jaws is perfect. Tell me a plot hole.
I mean, geez, come on.
It's okay. I know what you're saying. Your point is that even movies that are just about perfect,
that you would consider just about perfect, there are things in them that if you really pay close attention. Okay, plot hole example in Jaws, when they're using the found footage. I mean, not the found footage, the actual footage of the sharks in the water, and the actual mechanical shark. The ones of the shark in the water, there's a rope hanging out of the side of the shark's mouth. That's not on there when they're showing all the close-ups on the thing. Okay, that's a plot hole. How does that happen? But, you know, that's a continuity error. So another movie for me that's you know, just about perfect, and I think most people would probably consider perfect, is John Carpenter's The Thing.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
But, you know, there's people that would argue there's plot holes in that. I mean, so basically the point being is it doesn't matter how perfect anything is. There's always going to be plot holes that you can find, or, you know, continuity errors. But there are people, no matter what, that are going to try to find those things, and they're going to, you know, pick them apart, or, you know, make a big deal of that. And because there's, you know, unfortunately, the people who squawk and bitch the loudest about things are often the ones that get their voices heard, and then they get that kind of addicted to that attention and success or not success, but they get, addicted to that attention.
Yeah.
So then they continually pick things apart that don't need to be picked apart, just because you get to the whole thing of like, the fans basically, have turned against George Lucas with Star Wars because of the prequels. Dude, if it wasn't for George Lucas, there would be no Star Wars. So you're kind of biting the hand that feeds you type thing.
True.
I understand because, I'm not a big fan of the prequels myself, but at the same time, especially as someone who reviews movies on their podcast,
right,
and is also an artist, I try to strike a balance between being overly critical and, picking out the good parts, or at least if I don't like something, I try not to just bash it. I try to be at least constructive criticism with what I'm doing, which because again, as I say at the end of all my shows, opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one. Just because my opinion is one thing doesn't mean that your opinion's wrong. And that's the thing when people are trying to find movie reviewers or book reviewers, find the ones that you generally, if you've been listening to a show and they review 20 movies and you watch those movies and your opinion is completely the opposite, maybe you shouldn't listen to that, podcast or whatever, because obviously you have different opinion. Your opinions are vastly different. Find one that, maybe aligns more with your, the thing is, there's so much content out there now that there's no reason anybody needs to harp on the negative, and they can find positive stuff to, go towards. Maybe that's kind of like metal hippie thinking in my brain, but that's how I feel about stuff. I really try not to be a negative person as much as possible and look for the good, the good in things.
Yeah, that's nice to hear. Me too, definitely. Same thing. And that's not to say that I don't get my hackles up sometimes. I mean, honestly, when the Dark Tower movie came out, my hackles were pretty up. And, but there were a lot of people who did like the movie. It wasn't like
I'm one of them. I enjoyed it for what it is, but I also am not. I've only read the first 2 books in that series, so I'm not like a diehard Dark Tower fan. So maybe that's why I enjoyed it a little more, because maybe it wasn't so much canon, as the books.
I mean, I've read the first 4. I haven't finished the series, but I would also say that I am a passive fan of the Dark Tower, but I am a fan. And like earlier in the podcast, I mentioned one of my big pet peeves is how adaptions are handled. And I think that's because I'm a writer. So I feel like, well, the source material is what you loved. So if you're finding value in the source material, then why are you changing everything about it that made it great? Like, why this attitude of people who so often, and this is certainly what, like, who did that last Fantastic Four movie? Was it Josh Trank or something? Certainly when that movie was coming out, the one with Michael B. Jordan.
I didn't even watch it simply because of the other ones being so bad. I didn't even watch it. So
yeah. Well, it's definitely something he said at one point with this whole we're going to put our own spin on it. That's creative death for me. Like well, not creative death. It's just like if I love something and somebody says, "Oh, we're adapting your favorite thing. We're going to take what you love and we're going to put our own spin on it and make it fresh." It's like, okay, that means it's going to suck and have nothing to do with the goddamn original other than like a couple character names, and that's it.
Now, okay, I want to bring this point up, though, with someone that just had something adapted from a story.
Okay.
Now, the written page and the visual medium are 2 completely different things. You can do way more in a story than you can visually.
Oh, for sure, but it's all about the spirit of the thing, and that's
like, exactly. When Shane,
you can tell when they're not aligned.
You know, when Shane Grant, the guy that's directing and wrote the adaptation of the screenplay, wrote it, you know, he told me up front, he's like, your story is a very narrative story. I'm going to need to add a few things and maybe change a few things a little bit to make it work visually. But he also sent me the screenplay when he got his, you know, his first, you know, his draft done, and he wanted to make sure I was okay with what he changed. And I was like, you know, for the most part, I was like, yeah, this is awesome. It really adds to the story from a visual perspective. Can I give you a couple suggestions of things maybe to add in? And he took those suggestions and he did add some stuff into it based on my suggestions.
Nice.
So, you know, I think it's nice. I don't think maybe everybody doesn't have that luxury so much, maybe, of, you know, being able to do that. But I feel like I'm very lucky to have somebody that got the heart of the story, but also was experienced enough in his medium that he could adapt it without completely changing what the story was all about.
Exactly. He understood what was good about it. Why did it have value to him? Why did he originally want to adapt it at all? There must have been something there. So you're not going to go just crap all over those things and be like, yeah, that made me love it, but now I have all these better ideas. I'm just going to do my own thing.
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons I think the It, you know, remake worked so well, because I personally adored that. That's right up there as probably in my top 3 favorite Stephen King adaptions.
I liked it. I definitely liked it. I didn't love it, but I definitely did like it. I think that I think it did have its heart in the right place, for sure.
And that was one thing.
But
you know, they did have to change a lot because it's a different era they're setting it in compared to the 50s and the originals to the, you know, the 80s.
there were certain things that didn't need to be changed. There was like matter, and a lot of people have said this, but the character of Mike was sort of stripped down and he sort of had nothing because they gave his stuff to Ben. And Ben already had enough in the book, and I don't know. I definitely agree with that.
I do agree with you there on that one. I was kind of disappointed that Mike was such a background character for most of it, but I'm hoping maybe with the second part, because he is such an integral part of the second part of the story.
Exactly. When they're grown-ups, he's the best character. He's the one who gets them all back together. There would be no second half.
So I hope he gets his comeuppance in the second part of it, and they really give that character a chance to stand out and shine.
Yeah, I did like some of the changes, though, for sure. I loved the creature that they came up with for Stan to be afraid of, the painting lady.
Oh, yeah, that was creepy.
And now, you know the whole thing that he directed that movie Mama, and that was essentially like basically Mama in it.
Oh, no, yeah, see, I actually haven't seen that yet. That's one of those ones on my backlog of films to watch.
He, it's one of those movies that a lot of horror fans really hated, and I loved it. I thought it was a really, really cool movie, and I thought that the character of Mama was really interesting and really visually creepy, and at the end she made sense, and there was thought put into it, and she was a character. She wasn't just a force of nature. And I don't know, I think it's interesting to learn that apparently both characters are like, they have this very skewed sort of physique. Their face and everything is just, all wonky. And apparently the director guy, it's all based on this painting that this one, I wish I could remember the painter's name. I don't. But apparently his mom had a painting of this creepy lady, and that's what he would do.
It reminded me of the painting called Scream.
It's not that, but
that's what it kind of reminded me of.
It does evoke that, yeah. But there is a specific painter that he came out. He admitted in an interview that it was this one specific painter, and they had this painting, and it was in his house growing up, and they scared the ever-living crap out of him, and he literally has brought it into Mama and to It.
Well, and that's something as creative people I think we often do. We take different influences and moments from our childhood that have stuck with us, and put them into our stories. I know for me, in my story, Mr. Witcher, it's a lot of that story is places that I grew, places that I frequented or that I was around when I was a kid, and moments and things like that reminded me of my friends and things, things like that, or just stories you heard about certain things and this and that. And a lot of that stuff, I not necessarily using it exactly, but that played a key role in developing, the dynamics between my characters and the story itself, and trying to weave that all together into something that hopefully is sort of comprehensible. So
Yeah, we take our lives and just sort of make them more entertaining.
So we're already on over about 50 minutes or so here on the show, and we haven't really talked music at all. So I did kind of want to talk about that a little bit with
Sure.
you. So what was that moment for you that you wanted to be in a metal band and be a singer? I guess is my question, because I know I have my moment, so I want to hear what yours is.
I don't know, man. It's been a while, this is the second album that we've put out with the band Enchanted Exile. We had a previous band before that where we did some stuff that we didn't release, but we were together for a long time. And honestly, it goes back to like the late 90s, I think. We've been doing music, the same guys, for a really long time. That's 20 years.
That's impressive, because every band I've been in, I mean, you hit that 4 or 5 year mark, it seems like, with most of the bands I've been friends with or bands I've been in. And that's either where it's kind of like that shit or get off the pot, where you either break up or you go beyond that.
Yeah, we've had periods of time where we've decided to just stop for a while, but at this point with Enchanted Exile, we've been doing it straight for about 5-6 years. And we did have probably about 6 years. I think it took us about 3 years per album or so. And so we just are all old friends, and literally the whole singing thing came about because everybody else sort of played something and nobody could sing.
So you became a singer out of necessity.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
See, I was just the opposite. I remember, the first time I ever saw or heard Pantera, for me, and saw Phil out the video for Cowboys from Hell, and saw Phil Anselmo, just the way he sang and shit, I was like, I was a metalhead already at that point. I listened to Slayer and Sepultura and Metallica and Testament and Suicidal Tendencies, but I never heard anybody do like that heavier kind of screechy singing like that. And I was just like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
And I was like, man, I bet I could do something like that. But it wasn't until a few years later when I saw Sam Black Church, one of my favorite bands of all time, and a Boston band. I saw Sam Black Church live, which was the first time I ever really saw like any heavy bands live. And
they're super fun live. I mean,
they are one of the best live bands I have ever seen, as far as just the energy they put on live is so incredible.
Yes.
So I saw them in this little club. There's like 100 people in, and the place is packed. And Jet is climbing across the rafters like the alien, crawling across these like metal pipes over the crowd and swinging over the crowd. And I'm just like, I want to be a front man like that. And that was the moment. It's like, I want to be in a band and I want to do that. That was just that, that was like that serendipitous moment where I was like,
I has antics.
Yeah.
I think that, the first singer I sort of tried to emulate was actually Dave Mustaine from Megadeth.
Yeah.
I was really set on singing like that for a long time, a few years. And so for a while, I just sort of sounded like terrible version of Dave Mustaine, who's already not great. And I don't know. I love the guy, whatever. I love Megadeth. But and then sort of as I grew in confidence and skill, and I really pushed myself and started taking lessons and doing stuff, and I started to, find my own voice and stuff like that. And there are definitely moments where I feel like I'm channeling different people. I definitely have a moment in the first album where I fully straight up just did an Alice Cooper thing. And it's actually in the song Enchanted Exile. If you listen to the chorus, that's just me doing Alice Cooper. And there's a very quick moment in one of our songs on the new album. Very quick, very, very blink and you miss it. I feel like what I was doing was this like real quick Dee Snider thing.
Yeah.
Like just real quick. And there are moments where I definitely channel like Matt Barlow from Old Iced Earth and stuff, and Bruce Dickinson's in there a little bit. And they sort of all just kind of.
Bruce, one of my all-time favorites. So I'm a huge Iron Maiden fan. So Power Slave, one of my favorite albums ever, you know.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Power Slave's amazing. All the old Maiden stuff I love. Love Maiden.
I always will have a soft spot for No Prayer for the Dying because that was the first Maiden album I ever picked up. And
dude, I like that album. That album gets no love at all, and I totally like that album.
No, you know, next to Power Slave, those are probably my two favorite Maiden albums. You know, I mean, granted, pretty much everything from Fear of the Dark back for me is gold, but but
Bruce up until when Bruce left the first time, it was just all awesome. But I mean, Somewhere in Time's always been my favorite, but Power Slave is probably my second.
There's but there's those moments as a singer. Again, it kind of goes back to that we wear those influences on our sleeves.
Yeah, I definitely do.
We did, you know, when I was in the band Salvo, when I did my first demo song with those guys that we released of new material, we did a song called As You Rot. And the demo version is up on YouTube if anybody wants to track that down. Just type in Salvo As You Rot. But I had a bunch of people who were like, dude, you sound just like Randy Blythe on there. You know, and I was like, I guess I didn't even realize that I was, you know, they were like, oh, you guys are just trying to rip Lamb of God off. And I'm like, not really, but that's kind of how it came out, I guess. And, you know, I didn't even really think of that until I actually had somebody say it. And then I listened to it and I was like, holy shit, I guess I kind of was. Or, you know, and back in the early days, people would say the same thing, you know, like, dude, you kind of sound like Phil. And I'm just like, well, you know, because that's how I tried to sound like when I first sang, just because I was trying to establish my voice, you know?
Yeah.
And as I got, you know, the further I got along in my singing process, you know, my range kept increasing. I was able to do more things. I was able to start adding in falsetto and, you know, a little bit of clean vocals and, you know, death metal vocals and that kind of mid-range, almost like hardcore screaming and just doing a little bit of everything, whatever fit the song.
It's just a smorgasbord of noise.
Basically, yes. Although my all-time...
And I mean that as a compliment.
Well, thank you. My, you know, and the funny thing is my all-time favorite band is in a metal band. You know, it's the Misfits are my all-time favorite band and have been since I was in 6th grade.
Okay.
But if you listen to all the singers that influence me, most of them aren't really metal singers. They're, you know, Bruce Dickinson, Freddie Mercury, you know, Glenn Danzig is a super, super huge, you know, influencer. You know, Phil, obviously, Jet from Sam Black, and you know, there's a few other, you know, George Fisher from Cannibal Corpse is another one that I just love. I just love that beefy, burly.
There's nobody that sounds like him.
Because most death metal vocals, traditional death metal vocals are, you know, unless it's the higher pitch stuff, you can't really, it's hard to make it out. He is, even though he sings guttural and low, you can still understand most of what he's saying. So he has that like perfect blend to me. And Jesse Leach from Killswitch Engage was another one that I just absolutely loved. The fact he could go from clean to just that nasty, heavy, you know, type singing. So, and I also love Johnny Cash and Kenny Rogers. So, you know,
there you go. Hey, whatever, man. Whatever floats your boat. It's all buoyancy, man. It's all buoyancy. Yeah, actually, it's funny you say, like, you know, the people that, you know, who say you sounded like this person or that person, you're like, you're not even intending it to happen. You know, the one I always get is Chris Boltondoll from Gravedigger.
Yeah,
that tends to be who I have been compared to, and I'm like, wow, I don't even like that guy. So I don't know how to take that, but okay.
Is that kind of a backhanded compliment for me?
I mean, I guess some people like him. I mean, shit, some people like Udo Dirkschneider too. I don't know. Not
hey,
me.
you know, balls to the wall, sir. Balls
You
to
got
the wall.
you got your balls to the wall.
But yeah, so anyway, we're getting to that hour mark, so we do have to start wrapping things up. Before we go though, where can people find your stuff to check it out, whether it be the music or the books?
Well, for books, definitely look me up on Amazon. I am under Steve Van Samson, Samson. And both my books, The Bone Eater King and Marrow Dust, are available in both paperback and Kindle. And you can also find me on Twitter. I'm on Twitter all the time. My handle is @Steve Van Samson, no spaces. So just Steve Van Samson. Don't type no spaces. That's not part of the handle.
No, well, I was going to, but you know.
Oh crap! Well, yeah, glad I mentioned it. And as far as the, I'm also on Facebook. Hit me up there. As far as the music goes, we have both albums and our single from the new album, which is called On Widow's Hill, on Bandcamp. You can go to Bandcamp and search for Enchanted Exile. You can also find us pretty much everywhere. We're on Google Play and Spotify and wherever you want. You can just give us a search, Enchanted Exile. I like to call us we're kind of like classic heavy metal. We're not like that extreme. We sort of sound kind of like, we try to sound like maybe heavy metal when it was still forming in the early 80s. Not the glam stuff, but some Maiden, some Priest,
Dio.
Dio is actually, we actually have, you mentioned Dio. We have a song on the first album. The first album is called Never After. And we have a song called The Bringer of the Horns, which we wrote as a tribute to Ronnie James Dio after he passed away.
Very cool.
And we worked in a bunch of his song titles into it and stuff. And we wrote it as if we were writing the Lost Heaven and Hell song. We really tried to we didn't take any riffs or anything. It was all just sort of headspace, let's try to write the song that could potentially have been a B-side or
it would almost seamlessly fit right into that. Yeah. Oh, I totally get that,
So that's kind of where we are and what our type of stuff is. It's definitely not, super modern, but to call it 80s metal, everybody just thinks hair metal.
Manowar.
That's not right either.
It's not, so it's not Man of War, is what you're saying?
No, but we do kill. We also, no, I was going to say we have the biggest amps, but no, we don't.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, thank you very much for coming on the show and hanging out and dealing with our technical issues. Before we go, I would like to thank my sponsors, the Maine Cannababes. You can go to www.mainecannababes.com to find out more information about the Cannababes, upcoming events, when the new calendar is going to be released, and all that good stuff with them. They're awesome people doing some very, very cool things. Again, I would like to thank Steve for being on the show, hanging out and chatting with me. It was a lot of fun. And I want to leave you with this one tidbit of advice. Remember, kids, opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one, and I will see you sexy animals on the flip side.
It's intermission. Rise and stretch time. Time to refresh yourself and visit our snack bar. Got a yen for hot popcorn? Your favorite soft drinks are sparkling cold. The juicy Frank sizzling hot. There's delicious coffee, freshly brewed, and all kinds of ice cream and candy to tempt you. Showtime will be announced loud and clear to get you back to your car in time. So stretch your legs. Come to the snack bar now.
Thanks for listening to Average Joe's Drive-In. If you'd like to talk movies or contact the show, add our social media pages. You can add us on Facebook at Average Joe's Drive-In Podcast, on Twitter at TWJ Author, on Instagram at Thomas Washburn Jr. You can also hit up www.thomaswashburnjr.com for more information about the show and related links. If you'd like to support the show, you can buy TJ's books on Amazon. Just type in Thomas Washburn Jr. in the search. Books are available in Kindle and paperback formats. If you have Kindle Unlimited or Prime, you can read the books for free and money will be earned by the pages read. It doesn't cost you anything and it supports the show.
Until next time, you've been listening to Average Joe's Drive-In.